Oh, greatly blessed.
Now let's talk about the hymn tunes of English psalmody. Clearly, they were set syllabically, compared to Roman chant, where you'd occasionally have a melisma. There's almost none of that. You would have everybody singing, unison, straightforward, right? That's what you do. That was the early days. If the psalms are set syllabically, that means there is very little opportunity for musical variety, of course. You just sludge through your part. You sing the alto part, tenor part, bass part, or the melody, and everybody goes together at the same rhythm. But what if someone were to enrich the harmony, as Bach would do, have some movement and contrary motion and all that kind of thing happening? That's one option. There could be some rhythmic variation. Then there was some melodic embellishment. As an individual singer, you would embellish the tune as you go along. So the congregation was going slower and slower. Remember, no instruments or anything to keep them going. Going slower and slower. So along the way, we all just introduce a profuse amount of roulades, runs, repeats, made the tunes they were intended to adorn much more attractive to the singer than the steady-going syllabic tunes, which had paled by incessant repetition and by the slow, long, drawn-out dullness of the manner with which was thought appropriate in singing them. The spirited melodic style was at the other extreme from the dreary drawl to which generations had become accustomed. But let's just try that a little bit. We're going to sing Psalm 1 together, as should be done, to the tune of what we know as Amazing Grace. And remember, we wait for one another. Nobody's to go ahead, nobody's to fall behind. We just wait for one another. Well, when that happens, we get increasingly slow and long and drawn out. So in the church, it's going to sound a little like this.
Oh, greatly blessed is the man who walketh not astray in counsel of ungodly men, nor stands in sinners' way.
Well, by the time we've all waited for each other and ponderously gone through all that, it's time for the individuals to start expressing themselves in some way.
In the scorner's chair, but places these delight upon God's law and meditates on His law day and night.
Well, by the time you get an entire congregation doing that, the truth is they've really gotten long, but people are enjoying themselves just a little bit more. Does that sound like any cultures that you know of in America today? So, where did hymns come from? Well, sometimes hymns were added to a Psalter. Now, how could you do that? Why would you add a hymn to the Psalter? I'm glad you asked. You add a hymn to the Psalms because in Matthew 26, verse 20, we find out that Jesus and the apostles, after they sang a hymn, went out to the Mount of Olives. Well, if it was a hymn that they sang, then it must be okay to add a hymn to the Psalter. We'll see more on that later. But in any case, you've got the 150 Psalms. Every once in a while, you add a hymn in there So that's one possibility. Sometimes there'd be devotional lyric poetry, finding its way into the common vocabulary of the church, such as Jerusalem, my happy home.
Jerusalem, my happy home, when shall I come to thee? When shall my sorrows have an end, thy joys when all I see?
And sometimes there would be an actual publication of hymns, such as Eternal Ruler of the Ceaseless Round.
Eternal ruler of the ceaseless round, of circling planets singing on their way, guide of the nations from the night profound into the glory of the perfect day. Rule in our hearts that we may ever be guided and strengthened and upheld by thee.
Some Anglicans tried to introduce hymns along the way, not with great success, because for the most part they were set on just psalms. Some Presbyterians introduced hymns. John Bunyan also wrote hymns. Pilgrim's Progress guy. Benjamin Keach, who was a pastor, a Baptist pastor in Horse-Lie-Down, actually suffered a church split over this issue. But he defended the practice of congregational singing and of hymn writing. We'll talk about that in just a second. The church that split off of his church was eventually pastored by the great Charles Spurgeon, by the way. Generations later, it became the great Metropolitan Church of London. Came out of this church split, interestingly.